I promised early on that I was going to do some acrylic painting using a watercolour style, and that's what we're going to do for this wonderful scene, which is Bamburgh Castle in Northumberland in the north of England. Now this is the castle during the day, or it's probably late afternoon, the truth be known, with the sun going down this side and looking south. But somehow this sort of castle, which stands on the Northumberland coast facing out over to Lindisfarne, it seems to me to be crying out and to be far more dramatic if we actually paint it in silhouette. Apart from anything else, it's a lot easier to paint, so you can very easily get a very good picture here just by using a minimal number of colours. And that's what we're going to do, because I've got a palette here. It's a slightly different palette. It's a watercolour palette that I don't often use, but it's ideal for acrylics. And the colours I'm going to use are yellow ochre, permanent rose and ultramarine blue. And what I'm going to do is a series of liquid washes in here. I'm probably going to, I was going to say cheat by using a little bit of white later on, just to create some highlights, which of course is not as easy to do in watercolours unless you use white gouache. But we'll see how far we get with these acrylic colours. And the brushes I'm going to use are the 1.5 inch flat brush and the number 2 filbert. Now I'm using just the nylon brushes here because they're going to be a little bit easier to manipulate on the watercolour surface. Let's have a look at that. Now for those of you who haven't seen the Watercolour Secrets painting course, you may not be familiar with this what's called a paper stretcher, and all it is a device that you can put the paper over, grip it with some special grippers around the edge that sit in grooves. As the paper dries, it tautens to a very smooth, flat, beautiful surface to paint on, and that's what we're going to use here. One of the issues with acrylic paints, even more so with watercolours, is that, as we know, acrylics dries quite quickly. So I'm going to start off by painting or wetting the paper with clean water all over, not flooded, but certainly damp enough so that when we put the acrylic paint on, it doesn't dry in tide marks, particularly as we work on the sky. Right, now I've used a large 1 inch brush just to dampen all of the paper thoroughly from top to bottom, because with acrylics tending to dry so quickly, we need it to be able to be blending in the sky especially, and unless the paper's damp, it's going to dry very easily and very quickly with tide marks. I'm starting off, and before I forget anything else, you can see that I've mixed 3 good pools of colour. I've added a little bit of the red to the ultramarine blue for this top corner here, and before we get any further, I'm going to just run that. Yeah, you see that's running nicely. That's nice. That perhaps even could be a little bit thicker. There we are. You've got to be a little bit careful with acrylic paints, where especially where they're thick, because you might get little blobs of colour, of solid colour on them where you don't want them. And now I'm just quickly going in. You can see this is almost like a variegated sky that we did in the Skies DVD. You can see the way the paint is running down very quickly. I'm bringing in the red and a little bit of the yellow in here to give this warmth in the morning sky. I mustn't forget to do that bit over there, because that's just as important. Right, I've got to bring the thin wash, that's it. I've got to bring that thin wash of yellow ochre into the horizon, because it's not an awful lot of colour in there, but it is there. And if we leave it white, it'll look wrong. Now I'm going to carry this down. Think of reflections and the exercises we've already done on reflections in water. So the nearest point here is going to have in its reflection a little bit of, remember, light sky or light whatever, darker reflection. here, the purple, quite light, so slightly darker reflection. And when we get here slightly darker, we'll have it a little bit lighter, like that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just lift the paper up, and I'm just going to, particularly with that sky colour, I'm just going to let it run together a little bit, because there's a couple of clouds I want to put in on the left hand side here, but I need just first of all to get the paint mingling. I don't want to use the brush because it's going to start making it muddy, and right now it's absolutely fine. It's one of the beauties of watercolour, or in fact using acrylics as a watercolour technique, that half the time you can sit back and let the paint do the job for you and you claim the credit later on. And what I'm just going to do now, I'm going to bring in the 1/2 inch flat brush, and just bring in a little mix of the red and the yellow, like that, perhaps a bit more red than yellow. I'll put it over here out the way, and we'll add a little bit of blue in it, and you can see you've got that sort of nice warm purpley grey. I'm just letting this die off and settle in at the moment. It's still very wet. Right, I've let the paint, I won't say dry a little bit, I've let some of the gloss go off, the shine go off the watercolour paper, and I'm just now adding a little bit of, you can see it's this colour here that we've added in, but so it doesn't create a cauliflower, I've mixed in some additional pigment, so the paint itself is actually slightly thicker and heavier than the original paint that went on in the background sky. And we'll put another little layer on just there, like that, maybe a little bit more blue just to darken it. It's going to be actually darker, a little bit of neat ultramarine there, yeah, that looks nice, that's fine. It's actually a little bit darker as it gets away into the distance. Right, we've let that dry off now, and you can see that we've got quite a nice effect with a couple of streaky clouds against this, what promises to be a beautiful day in the northeast of England. Next thing we're going to do really is the castle, and I'm going to use the 1/2 inch flat brush, and really all I'm going to use is a series of dark colours. Now by that, all that I mean is that I'm going to mix some ultramarine blue, some permanent rose, and some yellow ochre, and I'm going to keep it reasonably wet. But what I'm going to do is vary the proportions of the colour, so we don't want a solid, flat, boring, single dark colour here. You'll find that as we go across from right to left, that I'll change this and I'll bring in some yellows and some more reds, so that there's all sorts of colours reflected from the sky. Just going to bring in a little bit of that permanent rose. I think what I'll do is where the shadow side of the castle buildings are, i.e. this one here on the right hand side for instance, I'll tend to make a bluey darker mix, and where the warmer side is, I'll start to add in some of the permanent rose and the yellow ochre. But I hope you can see now that as we just take the long spit of land out into the sea on which Bamburgh Castle sits, that we've created quite an interesting set of lights and darks, very subtle lights and darks of the castle itself. So I'm going to leave that now like that for the moment to dry off. Okay, not actually much more to do now. What we're going to do is pull out some of the darks on the beach here, leaving the rivulets of water that have been left high and dry with the receding tide, and that gives us an opportunity, particularly here, to do some dragging downwards just to give a sort of a reflection of at least part of the castle. Again, I'm using similar colours to that which I've used on the castle itself. As we get further into the castle, I'm going to use some of the redder and yellow colours and leave this very dark colour for the foreground. Again, although I've drawn some light pencil lines, which I think you can probably still see, it really doesn't matter if you don't follow those exactly. I'm not worried about following them exactly, that's for sure. I'm just making sure with the 1/2 inch flat brush that I'm going across horizontally. The reason for that is that if I miss any little bits and pieces like that there or that there, it'll simply show up as if it's the light reflecting on little pools of water. So I've got no problem. You almost can't, those famous last words again, you almost can't go wrong. Right, so I'm trying to keep, well, I'm doing my best to keep this paint nice and fluid, because it's drying off remarkably quickly under these, well, it dries quickly anyway, but under the studio lights it's drying off even quicker than normal, so I can't hang around. So we'll just put some darker colour here in this corner and then make sure that we have it particularly dark at the edge of the water, just like that. It just gives a little bit of added punch and emphasis to light against dark. Okay, it's dried off nicely now, and just a few little reflections. I think we just defined the sea against the sky here by bringing in a very, very pale wash of mostly yellow ochre with a tiny little bit of permanent rose added, perhaps maybe just a touch more in there like that, just picking up on some of these clouds. Now, as far as these reflections are concerned, the first thing we'll do, because I've just taken the wet paint over that area, I'm just going to make a little dry area just about there, because that's about where the castle ends, and just so we don't have any danger of the paint running sideways. And we'll just take this mix that we used for some of the clouds in the sky, and with the brush we'll bring it straight down like that. If we're looking at testing the height of that, perhaps just coming down there like that. But we'll leave it like that, and that's fine. Now then, we'll just again strengthen some of these darks here so that they do really stand out against the adjacent water. Right, I've used the number 2 filbert to put some darker streaks in the foreground. That helps to push the castle back and push the viewer's eye further into the picture. I'm very happy at the way these lighter areas have come out in the castle, particularly this one. Nothing down to my skill, purely and simply one of those happy accidents where some of the red and yellow happened to settle at that point, but it's provided a perfect situation where that part of the castle nearest the sea is actually catching the first rays of sunlight as it comes up for another beautiful day. So I'm going to leave it at that. There we are. We've got acrylics watercolour style with Bamburgh Castle in Northumberland. Right, in Bamburgh Castle I've made one fairly subtle change here and here, where I've scraped in a little bit of yellow and white paint purely to give a hint that the sun's rays are just starting to reach across this otherwise flat and featureless beach. And it was really just an attempt to give a little bit more texture in the foreground. But the biggest change I've made was that, having put the reflection of the castle in here, which I was very happy with, I realised I'd completely forgotten to put any reflections in for the clouds. So I've done that. Having done that, I'm not absolutely sure that it improves the composition. So I've left that as it is, so you can make your mind up whether you think it's better with or without. And as a lesson or as a learning process to you, to be aware that when you're going to put reflections in something like this, or where reflections will fall, are they going to actually improve or detract from the composition by having to put them in? I'll let you decide.